carriage came up the long dirt road to the Carter Ranch just after sunrise, wheels cutting through frost that hadn't yet burned off the grass. And Ethan Carter knew, before it had even come to a full stop, that his whole world was about to tilt sideways. He was 34 years old, one of the most respected cattlemen left standing in the county, and in a territory that had just buried 9 out of every 10 head of cattle in the worst winter anyone could remember. Still standing meant something. He hadn't seen that particular carriage, or the woman who stepped down from it, in 12 years. He'd spent every one of those years believing he never would again. Clara Whitmore looked different. Thinner in the face, a little gray already threading through hair that used to be pure chestnut brown, dressed plainly, but with the same quiet dignity that hadn't left her even once, not in 12 years, not even now. She stood at the bottom of his porch steps with her hands pressed flat against her skirts to keep them from shaking, and for a long moment neither of them said a word, just the creak of the carriage wheel settling into the mud, and somewhere out past the barn, a meadowlark calling like nothing in the world had changed at all. Then Ethan saw the girl. She climbed down after Clara, 11 years old, dressed in a traveling coat a size too heavy for the season, gripping her mother's hand with the firmness that spoke of nerves she was working hard to hide. Dark, curious eyes swept across the ranch house, the corrals, the mountains rising blue and cold beyond the fence line. And when those eyes finally landed on Ethan, something in his chest went hollow and cold all at once. Because the girl had his eyes. Not similar, his. The same gray-green, the same slight narrowing at the corners when she squinted against the morning light. The exact look his own mother used to say came down from his grandfather's side of the family, Clara. His voice came out rough, 12 years of unspoken things caught behind it. What is this? Who is she? Clara's chin lifted, the same small, stubborn gesture he remembered from a lifetime ago. Ethan, she said, I needed to see you before it was too late. There's a great deal I have to tell you. And I expect, just from looking at her, that part of it you've already guessed. If you want to know the truth, Clara Whitmore carried 12 years across half a territory. And the secret, written plainly across a little girl's face, stay with me tonight. This is a story about love, about the lies that nearly buried it, and about a truth that finally found its way home, 12 years too slow. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, what country are you listening from tonight? I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to that porch, because what Clara says next changes 3 lives and a good deal of Cedar Hollow along with them. To understand that morning on the porch, you have to go back 12 years to the spring of 1876, when Ethan Carter was 22 years old and hadn't yet learned that the world could take something from a man without so much as a warning. He and Clara Whitmore had grown up on neighboring spreads outside Cedar Hollow, their family's fence lines running close enough that, as children, they'd worn a path between the 2 properties without either set of parents quite noticing. By the time Ethan was old enough to court her properly, there wasn't much courting left to do. Everybody in the county had already decided, years before he ever worked up the nerve to ask, that the Carter boy and the Whitmore girl belonged together, the way 2 halves of the same fence rail belong together. Neither one fit right without the other. He asked her at the river crossing where they'd played as children, down on one knee in the cold spring mud without a thought for his good trousers, and Clara laughed and cried at the same time and said yes before he'd gotten the whole question out. They set the wedding for June. Ethan had already cleared ground for a house of their own, half a mile from his father's place, using timber he'd cut and seasoned himself the winter before, specifically for that purpose. Cedar and pine, split and stacked and dried through a long Wyoming winter, so it wouldn't warp once it went up as walls. Clara had begun sewing her wedding dress out of good cloth her mother had been saving for years, waiting on exactly this occasion. 3 weeks before that wedding, it all came apart. And it came apart, as these things usually do, not through some grand betrayal, but through the quiet, patient work of a man neither of them had reason to suspect.
Clara left Cedar Hollow on a Tuesday morning in late May, and there was no note waiting for Ethan, no warning, nothing at all except an empty house and a mother too frightened to say much of anything. Her family told anyone who asked that she'd gone to stay with an aunt in Cheyenne, her nerves worn thin, they said, by a wedding too large and too soon.
Ethan didn't believe it for a single hour. He rode straight for his own father's place, and then, when his father could offer him nothing but a folded letter and an apologetic look, Ethan did something the gentler tellings of this story sometimes leave out. He rode across the fence line to the Whitmore homestead itself and pounded on the door until Clara's father came out to meet him on the porch. "Where is she?" Ethan said. Not a question, a demand, plain as a fence post. "Gone to Cheyenne, same as we told you," old Whitmore said, and something in the way the man wouldn't hold his eyes told Ethan there was more to it, though he couldn't yet say what. "Best you let it lie, son. She's made her choice." "I don't believe that," Ethan said. "And I won't. Not from you, not from anybody, until I hear it plain from her own mouth." He got nothing more out of the old man that day. Not because Whitmore was cruel, Ethan understood only years later, but because Whitmore himself had been shown the same forged letter Ethan's own father had received, and believed, in his own frightened way, that he was protecting his daughter's reputation by staying quiet about a scandal that had never actually happened.
2 days later, Ethan rode the 11 miles to the rail depot outside Cedar Hollow and bought passage on the Union Pacific line running west toward Cheyenne. 3 hours of hard, coal-smoke travel through open country, the locomotive's whistle cutting across empty grassland that seemed, to Ethan, to stretch on without end. He searched the address his father's letter named for 2 full days once he arrived, only to find no aunt living there at all, and no trace of Clara anywhere a heartbroken young man knew how to look.
What Ethan didn't know, what almost no one in Cedar Hollow knew, was that a man named Silas Boone had spent the better part of that spring quietly working to see this exact outcome. Silas Boone was not, in his own mind, a villain. That is important to understand because it is closer to the truth than the simpler version of this story usually allows.
Silas had courted Clara himself, 2 years before Ethan ever did, and had been turned away gently but firmly. He told himself, in the years since, that Clara's family had simply misjudged which young man could actually provide for her, because Silas, unlike Ethan, had inherited money, and Ethan, in the spring of 1876, had inherited nothing but a modest spread and a great deal of debt his own father had taken on to survive a hard winter 3 years before. By 1876, Silas Boone had also become the county's newly appointed land commissioner, a position that gave him authority over water rights, boundary disputes, and homestead claims across 3 townships, and considerably more power than his neighbors ever quite realized to hand to a man with a grudge. He told himself that Clara marrying into the Carter family, a family he judged one bad winter away from losing everything, would ruin her. He told himself he was saving her from a mistake she was too young and too in love to see clearly. It was a lie he'd built carefully enough to believe himself, which made it considerably more dangerous than an honest man's simple jealousy. So he intercepted a letter Clara had written her aunt in Cheyenne, laying out her own careful wedding plans, and replaced it with a forged one, suggesting Clara had grown fond of a wealthy suitor in the city and meant to end her engagement quietly, sparing everyone a public scandal. He showed that letter to Ethan's father, and a similar forged account to Clara's own father, each version cut to fit exactly what the reader already feared most. By the time Ethan understood the shape of the lie he'd been told, Clara was 3 counties away, believing an equally cruel story of her own, that Ethan, hearing whispers Silas had also carefully planted about her family's shrinking finances, had quietly decided he no longer wished to marry into a name that couldn't bring land or money to the Union. Neither of them ever heard the truth. Only Silas Boone's version of it, cut 2 different ways, each one perfectly built to keep 2 young people permanently and believably apart. Ethan did what any man does when his heart's been carved out and there's still a ranch that needs running regardless. He worked. He inherited his father's spread 2 years later and grew it, slow and stubborn, acre by acre, until the Carter brand ran across one of the largest herds left standing in the county.
And left standing mattered more than it ever had, because the winter of 1886 into 1887 had come down on Wyoming like nothing the oldest ranchers could recall. 3 feet of snow on the level. Temperatures that froze cattle standing upright in the open range. A die-off so total that folks still called it, flat and grim, the Great Die-Up. English investors who'd poured money into open-range cattle without ever once riding the land lost everything that winter. Walked away from ranches they'd never bothered to learn the shape of. Ethan didn't. He knew every draw and ravine on his own land the way another man might know the rooms of his own house. And he'd spent that terrible winter riding out before dawn each morning, breaking ice on the water and pushing his herd down into the sheltered coulees where the wind couldn't reach them, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night for 6 straight weeks. He lost cattle. Nobody in Wyoming came through that winter without losses, but he didn't lose the ranch, and by spring, with half his neighbors selling out for pennies on the dollar, Ethan Carter had land and cattle enough to buy up 3 failed spreads at a price that would have shamed him if he hadn't needed every one of those acres to keep the operation solvent. He courted no one seriously in all those years, despite more than one hopeful family in Cedar Hollow angling their daughters his way at church socials. Folks called him steady, dependable. A man who'd clearly decided, for reasons nobody pressed him about, that marriage wasn't a road he meant to travel twice.
What none of them knew was that Ethan still kept, folded in an old cigar box in his desk drawer, the one photograph he had of Clara, taken at a church picnic the summer before it all came apart. And some winter nights, when the work slowed and the house got too quiet, he still took it out and looked at it, wondering what exactly he'd failed to do to keep her. Clara,
Sleep,
3 counties
one.
away and later farther
Sleep
still,
now.
carried her own grief, and a secret considerably heavier than his. Within a month of leaving Cedar Hollow, she understood she was carrying Ethan's child, conceived in the last tender weeks before Silas Boone's lies tore them apart. She raised the girl alone in a small town near the Nebraska border, telling neighbors only that she was a young widow. Simpler, she told herself, than explaining a broken engagement and a man she believed no longer wanted either of them. She named the girl Grace, and she was born the following February, which meant that on the morning Clara finally brought her back to Cedar Hollow, Grace was 11 years old, with a birthday coming in a few short months that would make her 12. But Clara hadn't come back only to tell Ethan the truth. She'd come back because she was running from something, and the man she was running from was closer than Ethan Carter could have possibly guessed.
Back on that porch, 12 years later, Clara reached into the collar of her traveling dress and drew out a small, tarnished silver medallion on a worn leather cord. The very one Ethan had given her the night he proposed, engraved simply with both their initials and the date. "You kept it," Ethan said, something catching hard in his throat. "I kept everything," Clara said. "Every letter you ever wrote me, back before it all stopped. This medallion, and her." She glanced down at Grace, who watched the whole exchange with the careful, quiet attention of a child who understood something important was happening, even without grasping the whole shape of it yet. "Clara, how old is she?" 11, Clara said. "She'll turn 12 come February." Ethan did the arithmetic without meaning to, counting back from that spring 12 years gone, to the wedding that never happened, to the last weeks he and Clara had spent together before she vanished. The numbers landed exactly where his gut had already, silently, started to suspect. "She's mine," he said, not a question. "She's yours," Clara said, tears finally breaking loose. "She has been since before I ever left Cedar Hollow. I didn't know it myself until nearly a month after. And by then I truly believed, you'd already let me go." What Ethan didn't yet understand was that the man responsible for that belief was still very much alive, still holding an office that gave him power over half the water rights in the county, and had absolutely no intention of letting either woman walk back into Cedar Hollow and tell the truth without a fight. While Ethan and Clara talked slow and careful through that first afternoon, working through 12 years of misunderstanding one hard sentence at a time, Grace wandered the ranch yard with the fearless curiosity of a child raised mostly in small rented rooms, delighted by the sheer open size of the place. She found her way to the corral, where Ethan kept a gentle old mare named Dusty, and climbed halfway up the fence rail for a better look. Ethan came up beside her without quite deciding to. "You'll want to approach her slow," he said. "Let her get the smell of you first." "I've never been this close to a horse," Grace admitted. "We lived in town. Mama couldn't keep one." "Well," Ethan said, something unfamiliar rising warm in his chest at the plain, unafraid way she talked to him. "I suppose we'll have to fix that." He showed her how to hold her palm flat, let the mare come to her rather than reaching first, and Grace laughed, bright and startled, when Dusty finally nudged her hand, hunting for a treat that wasn't there. Later, walking the fence line together, Grace ran a finger along the taut wire strung between the posts and frowned. "This isn't like any fence I've seen in town." "Barbed wire," Ethan said. "Folks around here call it the devil's rope, on account of how it bites anything fool enough to lean into it, cattle included. Wasn't around much when I was your age. Whole territory used to run open range, no fences at all, cattle grazing wherever the grass grew best. This wire changed everything inside of 10 years. Now every man's got to mark his line plain, or somebody else's herd eats his winter feed before the snow's even settled." "Do you like it? The wire?" Ethan considered that longer than the question seemed to need. "Can't say I do entirely. Something about a fence changes a place once you put it up, draws a hard line where there used to be open ground. But a man's got to protect what's his, particularly out here. Particularly these last few winters." He looked down at her. "I intend to protect what's mine a good deal more carefully going forward." Grace didn't fully understand what he meant by that, but she understood enough to smile at him, and something in Ethan settled deeper than he expected. Their peace didn't last the afternoon. Just past 4 o'clock, the sound of a horse driven hard down the ranch road reached them both at once, and Ethan went still, recognizing the gait of that particular black gelding before he ever saw its rider clear the rise. Silas Boone reined up hard at the edge of the yard, his black gelding blowing steam in the cooling air, and he didn't dismount, just sat there, looking down at Ethan with the easy, practiced arrogance of a man who'd spent 12 years believing his authority in the county went unquestioned. His right hand rested with deliberate casualness near the grip of a long-barreled Colt holstered at his hip. "Carter," Silas said, spitting a stream of tobacco into the dirt a few inches from Ethan's boots. "Word travels fast in a small county. I hear you're harboring some interesting company." "State your business, Silas," Ethan said, "or turn that horse around. My business is the county's business, same as it's been for 12 years, Silas said. "I've had word that Clara Whitmore's returned without a husband's name to her credit, and a child on her arm nobody's bothered to explain. That kind of arrangement raises questions about respectability I'm obliged, as land commissioner, to look into, particularly when the child in question might have some claim on Carter land down the road." Ethan didn't answer right away. He stepped down off the porch instead, unhurried, and his left hand came to rest on the cold barrel of the Winchester leaning against the porch post, not raised, not aimed, just resting there, the way a man rests a hand on something he intends to use, if the need arises. "You'll want to think carefully before you finish that sentence," Ethan said, voice gone low and even. "I've had 2 days now to remember a few things, Silas. I remember you bragging drunk at the Cedar Hollow Saloon, near on 12 years back, about being clever enough to end an engagement without anybody the wiser. Didn't understand what you meant at the time. I understand it plain enough now." Something flickered behind Silas's eyes. Not quite fear, Not yet. But the first crack in 12 years of careful composure. That's an old man's drunk talk against a county official's word, Carter. Won't hold up anywhere that matters. Maybe not today, Ethan said. But I've got a daughter standing in that yard who deserves better than growing up believing the man who stole her father from her walks around this county respected. I'd think hard on that, Silas, before you ride off this land. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Silas wheeled his horse and rode back the way he'd come. But the look he threw over his shoulder as he went told Ethan plainly enough that this wasn't finished. Not by a long stretch. Silas Boone did not retreat quietly. Men who have held power 12 years rarely do. Within the week, word reached Ethan that Silas, using his standing as land commissioner, had opened a formal inquiry into the water rights running through the eastern edge of Ethan's property. A stretch of creek that, if Silas's office ruled against him, would cut off nearly a third of Ethan's grazing land from reliable water going into another hard winter. It was, on its face, a bureaucratic matter. In practice, everyone in Cedar Hollow understood it for exactly what it was. Silas Boone using the full weight of his office to ruin the man who'd humiliated him on his own porch. Worse, Silas began quietly suggesting to anyone in town who'd listen that a woman returning unmarried with a child under such unusual circumstances raised questions about her fitness to raise the girl at all. A threat Clara understood immediately, and one that frightened her considerably more than any water dispute.
"He means to take her,"
Clara said, pale, the evening the rumor reached her second-hand through the Whitfield sisters. Not outright. He's too careful for that. But if he can convince enough of the county that I'm unfit, that Grace would be better placed with a respectable family. He won't get the chance, Ethan said. But even as he said it, he understood that words alone and a rifle resting against a porch post wouldn't be enough to stop a man who controlled the very paperwork the county relied on to settle exactly these kinds of disputes. It was Clara, not Ethan, who found the answer. She had kept, all these years, far more than a medallion and old love letters.
Tucked inside a false-bottomed traveling trunk wrapped in oilcloth to survive 12 years and 3 moves across 2 territories, Clara had kept the original letter Silas had forged in her father's hand, the one meant for her aunt, intercepted and never delivered, which her own mother had in fact found among Silas's discarded drafts years later, and quietly passed to Clara before she died, understanding even then what her daughter might one day need it for. "I've carried this for 6 years, Clara said, laying the yellowed paper on Ethan's kitchen table. Waiting for a moment, I was brave enough to use it. I think that moment has finally come." The county's monthly land hearing was held in the same church hall where half of Cedar Hollow's business, gossip, and reconciliation traditionally got settled, and Silas Boone presided over it, as he had for 12 years, from behind a plain wooden table at the front of the room.
He called the matter of Ethan Carter's water rights first, clearly expecting a quiet, procedural ruling in his own favor before anyone in the room had time to object. Clara stood before he'd finished reading the complaint aloud. "Before this hearing goes further, Mr. Boone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I believe the county ought to see something relevant to your fitness to preside over it at all." She laid the forged letter on the table in front of him. The handwriting, once compared side by side with genuine correspondence from Silas's own land office files that the county clerk kept on record, matched unmistakably. Beside it, she placed the true letter her mother had kept safe for years, the honest account of Clara's own wedding plans that Silas had intercepted and destroyed rather than deliver. The hall went dead silent. The same particular silence Ethan remembered from a church supper years before. Though this time, it wasn't Clara's talent going unclaimed. It was Silas Boone's 12 years of quiet cruelty, finally, publicly named. "You forged this," Clara said plainly, "to separate me from the man I loved, because you couldn't accept that I'd chosen him over you. And you've spent 12 years since using the power this county handed you to make certain nobody ever found out. I imagine this water rights complaint against Ethan Carter is no different. Silas's composure, 12 years in the careful building, cracked open in front of the whole room. He didn't reach for the Colt still holstered at his hip. The hearing hall was no place for that. And even Silas understood the difference between a private threat and a public one. But his hands shook visibly against the table, and when Reverend Cole rose to demand a formal accounting of the letter's origin, Silas had no honest answer left to give.
The county stripped Silas Boone of his commission within the month, the water rights complaint dismissed the same afternoon it was raised, and Silas himself left Cedar Hollow before the year was out, his freight and land dealings sold off quietly to men who'd once called him a friend and now, plainly, did not care to.
Cedar Hollow, for its part, welcomed Clara back with considerably more warmth than the town had shown her the first time around. Whatever quiet judgment might once have greeted an unmarried mother's return dissolved almost entirely once the truth of Silas's 12-year deception became known, replaced by something closer to collective, unspoken guilt and a genuine, hard-won relief that the story had found its way, at last, to a fair accounting. Ethan proposed to her that spring, at the very same river crossing where he'd asked her 12 years before, down on one knee again in the cold mud. Grace standing beside them, grinning as though she'd personally arranged the whole moment herself. "I don't have a ring that matches the years we lost," Ethan said, "but I've got the rest of them, if you'll still have me." "I never stopped having you, Ethan Carter," Clara said, laughing through tears that had nothing to do with sorrow. They married that June, in the same small church where their first engagement had once been announced. Grace walking just ahead of her mother down the aisle with a fistful of wildflowers she'd picked herself from the field behind the ranch house, beaming with the particular certainty of a child who finally, fully belonged somewhere. And there, friends, is where we'll leave Cedar Hollow. A family whole again. 12 years and one carefully built lie later than it should have been. A corrupt man's power finally broken, not by a gunfight, but by a mother's patience and a piece of paper she'd kept safe for 6 long years, waiting for the moment she'd finally need it. What stays with me most about this one isn't the villain or even the reunion, sweet as it is. It's the ordinary, quiet tragedy of 2 good people kept apart for over a decade by a lie neither one ever got the chance to question. And the reminder that the people who do us the most harm rarely see themselves as villains at all. Silas Boone spent 12 years telling himself he'd done something almost noble. That's a more unsettling kind of cruelty than the simple, cartoonish kind, and I think it's worth sitting with for a moment. If there's something worth carrying home from Ethan and Clara's 12 lost years, I think it's this. Love deserves more benefit of the doubt than we often give it, and the truth, however long it takes, usually keeps until somebody's brave enough to bring it forward. Before you believe the worst about someone you've loved deeply, ask whether you're hearing the whole of it, or only the version somebody else found convenient to hand you. Thank you for spending this evening with me, wherever in the world you're listening tonight. If Ethan and Clara's story found its way into your heart, stay close. There are more like it waiting. More quiet corners of the Old West still holding on to second chances. Until next time, friends, hold on a little tighter to the people you love and ask the hard questions before too much time slips away. I'll see you in the next story.